all of our witnesses for their opening testimony, and I'd like to now move to questions, and I'd like to start with a few. Ms. Khan, how is China attempting to distort history to limit Taiwan's relationship with the United States and other countries? And
well, distorting the history is amazing to me sometimes that China even tries to lecture us on our history. I mean, that's how egregious it can be, almost to the point of, well, you had your civil war. But if you use that analogy, well, then the communists were the real rebels. And, you know, it was Taiwan, the Republic of China, that is the nationalist government. So they've flipped it around. So that's one. We need to know our own history and not let China distort our history for us, which is pretty egregious. The second thing is this constant refrain of, oh, well, you know, China has suffered this 100 years of humiliation. Well, we also need to know our own history, that we were not part of that, and that, in fact, the United States was part of building up a reformist, Republican China. And we worked very, very hard, indeed, to even have scholarships for people from China over 100 years ago. And so Ms. Tokuda also knows that it was in Honolulu that the founding father of the Republic of China, that's where he studied when he was young, in her great state. So we have actually a very, very strong relationship with China in terms of a reformist and democratic China.
thank you. And I wonder if each of you could give me your impression, because one of the things that has come up in the National Defense Strategy was that Taiwan was not mentioned by name. How important is that? I know that in the strategy it emphasizes preventing any nation, including China, from dominating the first island chain, and that being central to protecting U.S. allies, partners, and freedom of maneuver in the Western Pacific. Do you think there needs to be more clarity when it comes to external communications on this? Yeah, whoever would like to start. Mr. Koo, maybe start with you and then go right down the...
I think clarity is usually good. Sometimes it's not necessary, and I think one thing that we sometimes have a problem with is clarity without being backed up with action. So I think in this case, whether you mention Taiwan, if you're focused on defending the first island chain, I think that could be, what you need to do, and that's fine. I think if you didn't mention Taiwan because you're afraid of offending China, which I think is a suspicion, that would be bad, right? So I think it's hard for me to read the tea leaves on what happened here. I think clarity, but echoing what Ms. Rapp Cooper mentioned, I think the one thing the rhetoric does matter for is trying to show to Taiwan and international partners and allies that the U.S. is still committed to Taiwan, and I think that's where, whether it's in the strategy or somewhere else, that the public statements do make a difference in that regard.
Yes, thank you. So I have more details in my testimony. The national security strategy emphasizes that deterring a conflict over Taiwan is a priority. So that is an important point that's still in the national security strategy. The problem is it doesn't say deterring against whom. So, it does not cite China as threatening that conflict that we need to deter. Now, the NSS also does not cite the law of the land, the Taiwan Relations Act, 96-8. And that, to me, is problematic because it is, regardless of the 6 assurances and every other thing that we might talk about, any of the joint communiques, it is really the Taiwan Relations Act that is the most important for governing policy. And it is a change because in the first term, 8 years ago, the 2017 National Security Strategy did cite the TRA. Now, the current policy also did not cite even the one China policy. Now, I'm not saying we have to cite it, but I just found it very interesting that even this so-called one China policy was left off. And China didn't go ballistic over it, either figuratively or literally. So, as I mentioned, the national defense strategy is even more vague, because not only did it not cite the TRA, it also did not cite Taiwan. And then when we go into the statements by officials to further explain what that strategy means, it continues to raise even more questions of why are we respecting this so-called proud history with all the atrocities and threats that we know about. And the bottom line is that there's just, compared to a year ago, even a year ago, there's just much less talk from officials about China.
Thank you. Ms. Rapp-Hooper.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for what I think is a very important question. As the ranking member did observe in his opening comments, I do believe that it can be challenging for us if an important partner like Taiwan is omitted from the NDS, in no small part because we have seen in the Chinese press efforts to interpret that as a deliberate or indicative omission. So even if the omission was not indicative, and important steps like the historic arms package that was passed in December 2025 indicate a strong commitment, it leaves open space to interpret otherwise. But to take that further, and I think as both my fellow witnesses have indicated, the declaratory policy that we use over Taiwan is both especially important and especially complex. We know both in the political science literature as an academic, and I know from my time as a policymaker, that when U.S. declaratory policy appears to change, even if it is not deliberate, adversaries often do interpret that. One way or another, and again, often when there is no reason to. But the reason that I have made the recommendation to this committee that Congress should pass a resolution codifying all elements of our Taiwan policy is because we do see changes between administrations in the language that they use in both the national security strategy and national defense strategy. And because of Congress's statutory authority and long history in providing bipartisan support to our Taiwan policy, I think a congressional resolution that lays out clearly all of the elements of that policy would help to guard against some of that misinterpretation that can come from omission from a strategy document. Thank you.
Thank you.